Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Circling Seattle Sports. My name is Charles Hamaker. I am joined by Alison Lukan here. You'll know Allison from many different hockey ventures, from obviously contributing with the Kraken currently. Too Many Men is one of my favorite podcasts, as well as my friend Liv Lyons. I have to make sure I say that so I get good brownie points with her. The Athletic, and of course, one-time Richmond Spider mascot, which fascinating. Allison is talented in many different ways. I did not have mascot on my bingo card, but Allison, I just wanted to come on to talk with you about the PWHL Takeover Tour coming to Seattle and Climate Pledge Arena on Sunday. Um, for the growth of the women's hockey game professionally, as well as how Seattle might be a fit potentially. So I just brief. Do you have any brief thoughts on the game itself? I mean, when it was announced, how fun that was, and um, just an outlook on the game itself.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. This is awesome. I always love all the work that you and CSS do to promote all sports played by all people. So we love that. But no, I think it's great. I think that, we had the US Canada game here a couple years ago, which was awesome to see. And it's cool to hear, we heard from Hillary Knight during the press availability for this game or for the series that this is one of her most memorable games and the loudest barn she's ever been in. So I thought that was awesome. So I do think it's cool. I think it's cool that they're coming back. I think it's an interesting thing to look at from a business perspective, that this is how they're continuing to roll out proof of concept as well as market their product. But I still also can't help but think of the wear and tear of that ask on these athletes as well, and that it's cool that they're doing this, but I can't think of a men's sport that had to go out and prove to markets that they could exist before someone just said, I have money and I want to bring the team here. So we continue to make strides, and Seattle continues to be the benefactor, as we well should be, but would love to see more and more strides come.
And that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to ask you first, to talk about, the growth of the women's hockey game. Obviously, there have been leagues before this, and you've worked with Ohio State hockey, I believe, that
Mhm.
is. So, you've seen the college level of it, just can you speak to how you've kind of seen the women's hockey game grow? Because obviously, the WNBA and the NWSL are in the spotlight for women's sports growth, but there's been growth in so many different sports in that regard over the last few years as well.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, the biggest takeaway is that how awesome is it that we're talking about multiple pro women's sports leagues? So let's take the W there for sure. But I think it's funny, the road for women's hockey, and I, open and honest, am more of just a casual observer of the women's soccer side and the women's basketball side. I support them, but I can't. My brain is only this big. So, but in terms of intimately understanding the women's side of hockey, there's been some drama, there's been some politics around it, but when people come for that, I always challenge them to go back and look at how the NHL came to be. That was certainly not a nice bunch of gentlemen sitting in a boardroom shaking hands and making nice with each other. So there has been some drama, there's been some bumps, and maybe not always as easy as it could have been. But I'm excited to see this league get going. It seems to be valuable that there's one league now. I hate that maybe we've had some players lose playing opportunity, but I think the benefit of having one league and not the distraction of the infighting and concern over this way, that way, and legacy frustrations is helpful. And I'm curious to see how they can continue to grow. We continue to talk about better access to online viewing. We continue to talk about more teams and more support for these players and better salaries. So again, we'll take the W, but again, more strides.
Yeah, and that more strides kind of brings us to this hope for Seattle's expansion. Obviously, I think the official wording, I could be wrong. I'm really hoping I'm not, was that this was to kind of look at the potential markets, right, that the league could look at, and on paper it would make sense for them to kind of stick in the area where they are and maybe look at like older NHL markets, right? But you've obviously seen this city embrace the Kraken, and have watched that grow. What have you thought, just as honestly as you can, about Seattle's fit for expansion? It might not be as soon as this upcoming round of teams, but I think Seattle's made a solid case at the very minimum.
Oh, absolutely. I think they have. I think if you look at who we are as Seattleites and the community that we foster and amplify, I think that we show that we're ready to say, if you can play, you can play. And we have facilities for a team. You know, we have a beautiful arena that's already shown needs to be that big if you want to support the number of people who support women's hockey. And we've seen great turnout for the Storm as well. So I think overall, big picture, it's a really great fit. You look at, you mentioned I covered Ohio State women's hockey and men's hockey as well. And here we have a team that has literally won two national championships in the past 3 years and is still playing in a barn that was built over 100 years ago
Mm.
and is the mockery of women's side of hockey, literally. And it's just incredible that for a bazillion dollars that athletic department makes. And when I was there, many years ago, we were asking, oh, it's coming soon, it's coming soon. And they can't even be bothered to give two-time national champions a proper sheet of ice. So I think Seattle is different in that regard, that they're going to be happy and welcoming. But I think that when we look at the athletes and we look at the viability of a successful team, you have to set the team up for success. So I don't think Seattle gets a team until there's at least another partner team out west
Mm.
so that it's not constantly traveling back to the east. And I could see, I know you and I talked about this a little bit offline, that maybe the next wave of expansion is hitting into some more of those core NHL markets where hockey is comfortable and there is some support for the women's side. We think of Detroit, we think of Pittsburgh, we think of places like that. But I think that as this league hopefully continues to add teams, I think if you look at two, three, and maybe even if we were lucky, four teams making a statement out west and starting the western side or a western conference, I would certainly expect and advocate for Seattle to be one of those inaugural western teams.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest part because obviously there's excitement, around the league, as you mentioned, and the strides are important, of course. But yeah, I mean, and that was always a thing too. I think in the WNBA, it was concerns with Toronto, even adding, getting back and forth in Canada, and you obviously had the politics of, the charter flights and all that. So yeah, it just at least what came to my mind is making it viable is exact like you said. That's the biggest thing because you want the league to be around in however many years and not just get everything at once and then it not last. So um kind of to go back to growth, how have you seen, I know you haven't necessarily been here through all of it, going back to old T-Birds and Silver Tips days, but obviously hockey has been rooted here to an extent throughout time. How have you seen hockey support grow in the area? Because as some we do Thunderbirds and Silver Sip stuff as well, including Battle of the Sound. I believe it was last week. Goodness, time flies. Um, but you've done a great job at sort of at educating fans. The Kraken Hockey Network, and the broadcast as well has done that. And you had a CHAC, which was really fun to be at. How have you seen that hockey support grow? I know fans love to put on the jerseys because they look great, but just the fan base has always seemed to be so passionate. So how have you seen that sort of um I guess expand, if we're going to use that word, over the years?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I always try and respect that the hockey has had a foothold here well before the Kraken, as you mentioned, with, amazing legacy, prominent junior teams. But the reality is in all sports that it's the major leagues that will always draw the most attention versus what would be a minor league or a junior setup like we're talking about here. So I think just the fact of having a major league, a national level league team has drawn more attention to the game of hockey. And you mentioned it. I say this all the time. Honestly, full marks to the brand team and the marketing team because our branding alone, even if you come to one game and never go, I see people wearing Kraken gear all the time, not necessarily just on game days and not necessarily just in season because it's so darn cool, right? So I think that's huge. But what I think I'm most proud of, and it's not just me, is that we have really tried to make a concerted effort to meet anyone where they are in terms of their
Mm.
relationship with hockey and feed whatever excites them about the game. So if you want to come and sit in a cool space and cheer and feel like you're having a Seattle vibe sports experience, our in-arena game ops team has done that for you. And you can sit there and have a beer and a hot dog and cheer for your team. And that's awesome. And if you want to learn more about the game, we are trying to provide educational resources online and in our broadcast. And if you want to get really into the nuts and bolts of it, we're trying to do that too. So I'm seeing people, what I think is our biggest success is here we are in year 4, and I still am hearing from people saying, I'm learning from you,
Mm.
or I'm learning from the broadcast, or I just went to my first Kraken game and it was so awesome. So the fact that we're keeping those doors open and making it comfortable for people to come in wherever they are with their level of a relationship with the game says to me that we're constantly growing. And that was a big part of, the Kraken Hockey Network launching, is making it even more accessible. So as long as I keep hearing things like that, it's not that we need to hear we're doing a good job, but hearing that people are connecting and engaging and loving experiencing hockey however they want to, that's what stands out in my mind.
I know you're quite a busy person, but have you been able to peek at either of these teams at all? I know they met earlier this week, actually. This is a Boston team that obviously went to the final last year. And obviously, with a smaller league, there's so much talent on each team. Do you have any thoughts on this matchup going in? Do you have anybody you want to watch? I know we've mentioned Hillary Knight, and at least personally, when you talk so much about how you appreciate this place, it kind of endears. I've been endeared to Hillary Knight even before then, with obviously the rivalry series and how cool covering that was. But do you have any thoughts on Montreal, Boston, or is it more so just seeing how the city embraces this game once again, like the rivalry series, and letting it play out?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been a Hillary Knight fan for a long time. I was actually going through my Instagram for something else, and I found where she did a collab with a Free to Be shirt, the Olympics year. I bought that. I bought a bracelet that has HK21 on it for the Olympic year. So I'm all here for that. And again, if people just want to come and see awesome women play the game, I think that's great. Please show up. Please come support this awesome event. But if you are looking for more of the storylines, I think it's really interesting because you said the Fleet were we're going for the title last year, and this year they're struggling a little bit more. And they've got Erin Frankel predominantly in net. You've got Lauren Gable, who was a super talented player at Clarkson, who had a shoulder injury, and so she's kind of coming back and finally starting to get her scoring touch. But this is a team that has really struggled with penalties. And,
Mm,
we know there are some rule changes in the league even this year that,
yep.
there's the jailbreak where if you score a shorthanded goal, the power plays over. And if you're on the ice for the penalty, you have to stay on the ice, to start the penalty kill. So they've had some penalty issues, but they are the top penalty kill unit in the league right now. So this is where I kind of look at like juxtaposing the two sides. So
Mm,
Boston's on that side looking to become more, climb up the standings, whereas the Victoire, who obviously has Marie-Philippe Poulin, Laura Stacey, Erin Ambrose, and arguably the best goaltending tandem in the league right now, and Debian and Chuli. The both of them are top 5 in wins and save percentage, and they're getting the results. But what's interesting is they're not really closing things out in regulation, which is amazing for a team with Marie-Philippe Poulin on it. Lack of clutchness, per se. So they're doing a lot of work in post-regulation play,
mm.
and their power play has been struggling. But again, that goaltending unit has been a huge piece of what they can do. So I'll be looking on the special team side, and I think, again, you've got these stars like Hillary Knight, like Poulin, like Gable, but what is the goaltending going to do and what are special teams going to do? That's what I'll watch for.
Oh yeah, no, and that was one of the things, goaltending specifically, just how incredible Aaron Frankel is, and then obviously, like you said, looking at the tandem on the other side is it'll be fascinating to see what's going on in net on Sunday as well. You touched on the jailbreak, and I know as someone who obviously knows the ins and outs of hockey really well, and had a thoughts on offside calls last game for the Kraken. I'm just curious with the different rules for the PWHL. Is there anything you from there you'd like to see instituted in the NHL? I know it's not one for one, but the WNBA has done the in-season tournament, and then the NBA took it over. So not to have it be like you don't want to necessarily be the testing ground or the
Right.
sandbox for things, but it's helpful, I think. So would you take the gel? What are your thoughts on what you'd grab from the PWHL and say this would work in the NHL, and I would think it makes the game better?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because the NHL has historically considered the AHL their testing
Mm.
ground where they play with
Mhm.
some things,
Mhm.
and I'm not picking on you. I love you, but I want to reframe how we present this and say, you know, are they the testing ground for something the NHL can do? Whereas what I always talk about when I think about what the women's game has done, even when there were other leagues, is they're the innovators. Why aren't we
Mm,
catching up to what
hmm
they're doing
hmm
instead?
hmm
And, the women's side was the first side to really adopt a more aggressive penalty kill more so than the NHL. And now look, all the NHL teams are trying to do it. So I like to think of the women's game as much more innovative than the men's game. And I do love the jailbreak rule, which for people who aren't fully following along, like I said, if you get a shorthanded goal, the power play is over, which I think is just fantastic because special teams is all about momentum. And so throw the dagger in. Let's go. I love it. And then, the rule about having to stay out there if you're on the ice when you take the penalty. I know this is a controversial take. There are a lot of people who disagree with me, but I like that one as well because I feel like if you're the person who causes the infraction or if you're out there, in a way, you should kind of have to pay for these are the results of my own actions. So I like that one too. But I think if I had to pick one, it would be the jailbreak rule because I think it would continue to foster a more dynamic style of penalty killing. And I think that makes the game not just more potentially high scoring, but more enjoyable all around.
And firstly, I appreciate that totally, the first part, because as a man in women's sports, I want to be the one listening. I don't want to be the one taking the first step because it's not my place to do that. And it is true though. I mean, as someone who's been around the WNBA, my parents had season tickets to the Storm at the arena growing up. Like I have seen that innovation. And it's like the WNBA is often the one leading, and the NBA is kind of the one falling around. And that's also the case in ratings lately too. So yeah, no worries at all, And I'm surprised that there is backlash for that on having the players on the ice stay out for the kill. That's
Well,
I would
there's
agree
just
with
more
that.
there's just more philosophical debate about it of having, the right players in the right roles, which
Yeah.
I can appreciate. But I'm just for chaos. And again, what I am here for is to say, and as much as I was just picking on innovation versus test ground, it is real that these bigger men's leagues, it's harder to steer that ship. It's a bigger ship to turn. And
Mhm.
so the more nimble leagues can start to be innovative like this. But I'm also for it in part because I just want more and more like let's see, let's change, let's challenge, let's see what works, let's see what sticks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I have a lot of fun with this, so I hope I'm not pushing it too far, but this might be open-ended and might be difficult to put a real answer to, but what does a successful takeover tour look like to you? I know you've mentioned, the strain on the body, going out of your way for these teams to play these games around the country. Does it look like finding successful expansion sites saying, hey, this city really showed up, they make the most sense? Is it getting more eyes on this game across those cities and even streaming wise? What is there an easy answer to how a successful takeover tour looks like to you for the PWHL?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's full buildings. I think it's merch sales. I think it's higher viewing rates. It's exposure to new and existing fans. And I think it would be so sick that, like, maybe, right before the last game, there's an announcement that, someone who has the resources or a group of people who have the resources have come to the league and they're announcing two new teams coming next season. And it's not because again, well, it is in part, of course, because the league went there and said, look at how cool this is, but it compelled people with the resources to say, great, let me help you bring this sport and this game to my market. And I'm going to be the backbone to that, much like Mr. Bonderman was for us here in Seattle with the Kraken.
Yeah, I think that all makes perfect sense to me. Just even going back to getting the Storm, people talk about this last year being the big year for the WNBA. Covering the Storm the last few years, I see that merch table lined up. Those folks need help. So I think part of it is too is the demand of keeping up with it, you know. So yeah, no, Allison, I appreciate this. It is always, fun to see what you're doing, whether it is again talking about the offside ruling and that or it's too many men. I really appreciate you taking time out of the day to do this and hopefully well, you'll be in the stands, but just hopefully we all have a great event on Sunday. So
Absolutely.
until I
Absolutely.
see everyone next time, take care of yourselves, be well, and do whatever you can to make today a great day.